getting ready to go on our webinar, we want to thank our sponsors, TIA Crafts, the Center for Farmland Research. Dr. Bruce Sherrick holds the chair in our department for those. And then we have our Farm Doc sponsors that really help us, and that includes Compier, Cortiva, and Farm Credit, and also Illinois Corn, Growmark, and Illinois Soybean Association. We thank all of those sponsors for helping fund the Farm Doc efforts. We also want to thank our educational partners, Illinois Extension, and we very much appreciate being part of Illinois Extension. And I am in the ACE department, Agriculture and Consumer Economics, so they put up with me, so I want to appreciate them as well. As we're going through this, again, please submit your questions. This is going to be a round table discussion. Today we're going to have a roundtable discussion amongst myself. I'm Gary Schnitke. I'm a professor in farm management here at the University of Illinois and do a lot of work in extension and do most all of my work focuses on crop economics and risk management. We have two other great individuals here today, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves, tell them a little bit about themselves and what their nitrogen program is, and we will start with Joe Klein. So Joe, take it away.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Gary. Joe Klein, Western Champaign County, farmed with my parents and my wife and my brother and his wife. Predominantly raised commercial corn, some seed corn for Bayer out of Farmer City, and then soybeans. I guess our current nitrogen program is as a whole, we're putting about a third of our nitrogen down with some type of liquid weed and feed in the spring, and then coming back with the remainder with a side dress application end crop, either a UAN or a anhydrous ammonia form. So, and that's evolved over the years, and there's always different factors that influence our decisions, whether it's sulfur, timing, price, availability, labor, equipment. I mean, there's a lot of different things that we factor into that decision. And what we're doing today might not be what we do next year, or in the years to come. So it's kind of what works for us today, but might change in the future.
So are you pretty set for 2023, or are there still decisions that you're going to be making for 2023?
We have a position on some UAN. Might try to put some ammonium sulfate on, get a window this winter when things aren't froze, or, conditions and price and availability dictates that. And then as far as the in-crop side dress application, I mean, that's kind of still a moving target on the form, and our total rate structure will change a little bit there. So, and part of that depends on, is it corn on corn? Is it rotated ground? Yield potential, price of nitrogen probably is going to dictate that some as well. So, have a rough idea and some things in place, but still some room to make some minute changes, I guess.
Yep. Thanks, Joe. Kyle Meese, how are you today? And welcome to our Farm Doc webinar.
I'm good, Gary. Again, thanks for having me on. My name is Kyle Meese. I'm the agronomy manager here at United Prairie, based out of their Tolono location there, right south of Champaign. I said agronomy manager for them, as well as a farmer myself. Been with the company for 16 years now. Was a sales agronomist for a number of years. Took over as the agronomy manager about two and a half years ago. So, I'm conducting all of our localized agronomic research throughout the company, whether it be from something as simple as nitrogen stabilizers to forms to biologicals to foliars, just et cetera, as well as like I said, just as well as farming myself. And when I look at our own farming operation, very similar to what Joe and Klein Farms are doing, we put down about 110, 120 pounds of solution on pre-plant as a weed and feed. Like to throw some ammonium thiosulfate in with that application as well, just to get a foundation set. And then we typically come back with the remainder of our nitrogen needs as a side dress application, again, adding some more ammonium thiosulfate or sulfur component in that. Has worked for us for a number of years. From a company standpoint, though, obviously, very diversified. I would say from what I saw, when I started in this business, when I graduated college in '06 to what I see today, there's still a fair amount of fall ammonia that's going on, but I would say it's at a lower rate structure. So we're always evaluating that as a company is, okay, how many acres of fall ammonia do we have to do? Well, that's one piece of the equation. The other piece is, okay, how many pounds per acre are we putting down in the fall? And I think we've seen a tremendous amount of growers split apply for obvious reasons. There's an agronomic side of it. There's a side of it. And it just makes sense that the corn plant's highest demand of nitrogen is V8 to VT. So why do we need to put it all on 6 months ahead of when it's going to need its highest uptake? And we're continuing to explore that and manage that throughout the growing seasons each and every year.
All right. So got a diverse background there. Let's start out with the first application that we're going to be making for the 2023 year, which is the fall application. Kyle, that's going to begin pretty soon, I would guess. And what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I would say, we've started a little bit in some areas. There's always that fine line. We're all sitting there watching what's the soil temperature going to be, as well as what are the conditions are to apply it. I go back to what we saw the fall of 2021. The temperature was there. The conditions to apply it weren't always ideal, but saw a lot of guys that were going, what? We still try to do what we can to be stewards of that. At least try to get it down to 55 degrees if we're using N-Serve, which I don't know of many applications that don't go on in the fall of the year without N-Serve. But there's also just an efficiency side of things. And you're going to see guys going when that temperature is a little bit higher from that. There's just no doubt in my mind, but conditions are sealing well. I would say as a company, we've, again, just started initially. I would have to guess we'll get through this next rain period. And as we see that cool down in temperatures, it'll be full tilt going into next week, assuming field conditions are still going to be all right. We don't get too much rain.
Yeah. So do you think we'll see more nitrogen go on this fall or less compared to year earliers?
When I sit there and look at it, I think we'll be on a similar trend line of what we've been. If I go back again to fall 2021, just from an economic side of things, from a price point, we're at a much higher price point today than what we were in fall 2021. But I think there's guys they're very set in their ways. If they've done ammonia for years, they're probably not going to change from it, and they're going to keep getting it done. That timing, which is good. And I know we were talking ahead of this discussion, and Joe was mentioning it from an efficiency standpoint, we cannot get it all done as an industry in the spring of the year. It's not possible. It's hard enough to keep people employed these days, let alone driving 2 seasons all into one. So I think it's good that we have this. I think it's good that we do split it up, just from that efficiency side of things, as well as agronomically. I mean, if you're sitting there looking at knifing ammonia in 7 to 8 inches in the soil profile and then putting some more on in the spring, you're putting it at different levels that root zone is going to go after it throughout the growing season. And there's a huge importance to that, in my opinion.
Yeah. Joe, you used to put on fall nitrogen and moved away from it, I believe. Is that true or not?
Yeah, so I've been back. I graduated from the U of I in '05. In college, we were 100% spring solution right ahead of the planter. And then, we transitioned to where we'd split that up with some fall anhydrous. In the last 10 years, we've kind of transitioned to where we did more of the side dress thing. And, I think the biggest thing there is let's not have all of our eggs in one basket. And I guess the 2 baskets we're focusing on are the spring and the end crop. I'm not saying, like Kyle said, that fall's the wrong thing to do. And the thing we struggle with is there's a lot of factors we can't control, Mother Nature being one of them. So, we're making the best decision that we feel we can make at the time we have the information that we have. So, and who's to say, next year or in a couple of years we could change and, fall ammonia makes sense again. I'd say the biggest factor for us today is just we try to do some farm drainage and stuff in the fall and try to allocate resources and people to concentrate and get that done. And when we try to get too many balls in the air, sometimes we aren't as effective as if we just concentrate on 1 or 2 things versus 3 or 4.
Yeah. So Kyle, I've heard I've had this conversation a number of times. I got fall nitrogen booked. I'm going to put it on because I don't know what's going to happen in the spring, which is true to a certain
Sure.
extent. What would you say to that, or what are your comments? Or
You bet. No, I mean, it is a driving factor. And last year, so we've gone through, I can probably think of 3 or 4 where these contracts have been a big deal, and they're always ending the 31st of December. And what are we going to do? And what's the price point going to be? Is the supplier going to cancel our contracts? Or are we going to have to cancel yours? And the answer typically is yes. The supplier is going to do whatever is best for them, which may typically is not always best for the end user, which is the grower. What I tell guys a lot, and I try not to look at this, is if you're going to let the price of in drive a good agronomic decision, I don't know that you're looking at it the right way. And yes, we can sit there and we can look at today at, $1,550 a ton ammonia, and maybe it's going to shift up. I think our high last year was 1,700. Oh my gosh, it's $150 a ton. I always try to break that down as what is that on a price per unit of N? And so and take that number by how many pounds are you putting on, and then divide it out of how many bushel it's going to take to pay for that. And, we did one a little bit earlier here, and it was 2.5 bushel. So I think it's key to look at it from a different avenue. Don't get overwhelmed in the fact of how many $100 a ton is it going to drive up. Agronomics and making sure that crop is happy is to me still the most important as an agronomist. And one of the biggest things that we make money on in this industry is we have to grow bushels. So if we're risking the fact that we could lose some of that and that could affect our final yield potential, I think we have to look at it from both angles to make sure we're making the right decision there in the end.
so I'll tell you, if you're making a fall application or book some nitrogen, I would also suggest you look at pricing some of the corn output.
Absolutely.
Because right now we do have some pretty good corn prices in there, and I'm making no prediction about what corn prices are next year, but chances are if we have a good crop here and Brazil has a good crop, it could be lower. So we don't want the nitrogen up bought high and selling at lower corn prices. And just think about booking not all your corn, but some of it. I don't know if you, Joe, I don't know if what you're thinking there or at all, or trying to tie those in together, or not at all.
I think anytime you can take some risk off the table, whether that's hedging or doing whatever, it makes good business sense. The scary part is when you look at the input structure for next year, and it's going to take $1,200 an acre. One can argue to cover your cost, and even at $6 corn, you're going to need 200 bushels before you're on the right side of the equation there. So there again, let's spread out those eggs in a couple different baskets, and try not to do anything too drastic at any one given time, and hopefully that the law of averages kicks in and you're on the right side. So
yeah. By the way, I would concur. It's going to be about $1,200 per acre to put out a crop, but once you figure in land cost and everything, and the prices are there right now, and hopefully they will be there in the fall too. So, but we have increased the cost structure a lot. So we got fall on or not on, and we're moving to spring. Kyle, what are your thoughts? Anything we should be looking in general, spring application, or what would you be thinking about now?
So I think, we just talked about that, and maybe, booking some of your needs and looking at where that 32%, 28% market is and getting some of that taken care of, I think would be a good thing. I know a lot of that they're following each other. We used to always say if you saw an 8 to 10 cent per spread of unit of N between ammonia and 32%, that was about on par. That's somewhat been inverted and then come back. So it's kind of catches us off guard, but I still think you have to get some of that. You have to pre-plan. I know for us as a company, the biggest thing we've asked of our growers and customers that work with us is give us an idea of what you're going to do so that we can plan accordingly. And in today's, infrastructure, whether from, people issues for help, from shipping issues, Mississippi River issues, et cetera, we just have to have a plan in place so that we know what we need to bring in. We're fortunate as a company. We have some pretty good size warehouse ability. So that helps, but it doesn't last all season long. So communication in that essence is key, and having that conversation and just making sure that you are planning ahead for the events that are going to be here in another 4 or 5 months.
Joe, what do you think? You're putting most of your nitrogen on in the spring, or what are you thinking about now?
Yeah, I would echo what Kyle said. I think, and the biggest thing is we've all gotten spoiled, whether it's Amazon or whatever, the just in time. And I think that's kind of been something that's opened our eyes here in the last year or two, whether it's, with some different chemistries or toilet paper at home. But, we're seeing it at Diesel Field today. I mean, where we used to be able to pick up the phone and call and get what we want that day or the next day, it's made possession a lot more valuable than it was 2 or 3 years ago. And, whether that's physical possession is the biggest thing, which I wish we had more storage in that case, but also having some contracts and I guess some paper possession makes sense. And, just having a good plan. I like to be fluid and feel like we can make changes on the fly and adapt pretty quickly. But I think the external factors that we're facing today is kind of limiting that flexibility that we had a couple of years ago. So, where I wasn't always concerned about having the processes and the plans in place, it's became more of a focal point, and having that product on inventory when allowed. So, hopefully that's nitrogen or nitrogen stabilizer. It's a diesel fuel, fertilizer. I mean, all those things that we were spoiled we could go get at the drop of a hat or a phone call. Those dynamics have changed, and we get one thing figured out with COVID, and next thing you know, we get the threat of a rail strike or a war in Russia, and then the Mississippi River is dry. So I mean, there's just been a lot of things that I don't think anybody had focused, in 2019 that we're dealing with in 22 that make it a challenge. I mean, things are moving along pretty smooth, and we thought we had things figured out, and then it's just it's something different. It seems like every week or every couple of weeks, and definitely every quarter or every year here in the last 2 or 3 years. So interesting times for sure.
So Kyle, you got all your supply issues worked out, I take it.
Yeah, it's there's a guy that sits in the office next to me that fortunately has that responsibility, and he's done an exceptional job thus far. Knock on wood that we do that. And but I mean, Gary, yes, there's a supply side of things, but then just from an agronomic aspect of looking at what a guy needs to do going into the spring season, and what I look at, and I think what we look at as a company is kind of going back to the beginning of this webinar is trying to set that foundation up and get that corn plant off to a good start. And part of that is the nitrogen component. Another part of it, I feel like, is a sulfur component, let alone making sure all the other limiting factors are in place that you need to be addressed to have a successful corn crop. I've continued to do a pretty extensive amount of research on nitrification inhibitors. There's a lot of different flavors in the industry right now. Insur from an ammonia standpoint has been a staple in the market for 40 plus years. There's some competition coming into that marketplace now. Probably one of the biggest things looking at is not only, got to look at the performance of the product, but the corrosiveness and what it's doing to equipment. So we're looking at some things there from a pre-plant aspect. But then, as Joe was talking about, some of the things that he's been doing with nitrification inhibitors, even from a side dress aspect, and where that makes sense. We've continued, and we're going to continue to look at that as a company from an environmental standpoint, as well as just, again, it comes back to yield and economics, and where it makes sense to do that, and what are the right products that are, I tell this to everybody. Every rep that comes and sits across from my desk has always got a product that works. They always work, and I'm not saying that they don't, but do they work here in East Central Illinois? And we're fortunate to have some pretty tremendous soils here. And I say this a lot, but our great soils are sometimes our worst enemy because they tie a lot of things up. So what's the best stuff that we can use to show that effectiveness and get performance out of it? Not only performance, but consistent performance, and then return on investment. Because that's where it's all about. That's what it's all about in the end.
So we're moving into spring. But so Kyle, you put on your nitrogen weed and feed. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, we do a little bit on weed and feed, just, with some herbicide to just get that foundation set and try to keep any competitive weeds from, taking advantage of that young corn crop growing.
Joe, what do you do pre-plant?
So we'll do the same thing. Whether it's an AMS application or a solution UAN, it'll definitely have some feed there. If we're doing the AMS earlier, we'll come back and do a pre-weed pass as well prior to working the ground and planting. And I think the biggest thing is let's try to get the nitrogen put on when ground conditions are fit, whether that's ammonia in the fall, ammonia in the spring, UAN in the spring. I mean, if you do it at the right time, they all work great, and they're all going to thaw on you when you try to do it in the wrong time. Going out there with a floater that weighs 50,000 pounds, and when it's wet, you're going to see that all year. So, just because that's the way we like to do it. I mean, doing any of them in the mud's probably a bad idea.
Oh, so you put a third of your nitrogen on pre?
Yeah, usually a third and a half, so 70 to 100 pounds. It seems like when we were raising a lot of corn on corn, the magic number for us was try to get that 70 to 100 pounds to not pay that carbon penalty and to get that crop off to a great start. Having in-furrow capability would be I think it has some advantages. It's not a path that we've taken, but I think just trying to spoon feed that crop and give it the things it needs to be successful and to put as many bushels in the bin at the end of the year is what we're after. So at the right price point. So.
Yeah. Kyle, what you do similar type of thing? What's your rate?
Yeah, do a similar type of thing. We've had some ground in the past to where, and I go back and I look at a lot of soil test information, not just from a PHP and K level, but I'm always paying attention to CECs and base saturation. That's a whole nother conversation. But that CEC has been it's been a big focus for me. We have some farms even at home that have a little bit lower CEC, so that holding capacity is not there as well. So I've had some scenarios in the spring of the year where if conditions are right, we'll put some fall ammonia on. And I mentioned earlier, kind of a layered approach to nitrogen application where we can have a layer of nitrogen 7 to 8 inches below the ground, still come back with some weed and feed. So you have some right there in the top. If you're working your ground with a field's cold air sweep 3 inches, you're incorporating half as much. So say it's 1.5 inches there, and then come back and side dress 15 inches over. So that way, every time that corn root is growing at that 30, 35 degree angle, we're hopefully always in some form of a nitrogen zone. And I think it's important that Joe mentioned when he's doing half this amount of N maybe up front, so maybe that's 70, 100 pounds of N. So that tells you we're capping out at maybe 200 or 220 pounds of N. And I remember when I back in high school and even college, it was always the old 1.2 is what the most you should do rule. And I think we found that the efficiency with these new hybrids and I would say I'd say the average that I'm probably seeing from bushels that we're putting on versus N is probably 0.7 or 0.8 pounds of N per bushel. And again, that's the efficiency of the hybrids and what they've been able to do. The other of it is the mineralization capability in our soil profiles and 3.5% organic matter soils. Does that happen every year? No, this is probably one of those years where we didn't see as much because we were running through some dry conditions. So, but I think that's a win going forward because I think there's a point in time where we were probably over applying too much, and what's the detriment of that looking on down the road?
Yeah. So, how much, Kyle, anhydrous ammonia and UAN do you see put on pre-plant?
I would say in that, you mean from the total amount of a grower's in goal?
Yeah. I'm not sure. Big 2%. I'm not looking for precision here.
Yeah. No, I mean, I would say it's pretty much on. I'd say 50% of a grower's total in needs are typically put on pre-plant. There's always that concern as when we go and we take all those eggs in that basket, we put it towards a late season need, when's the right timing? Can we get it on at V3, V4, V5? Some guys, when the Y drop came out, they were going to push it on later and later. I mean, I think there's a point in time where we have to get that nitrogen on before its highest uptake. And I don't care, whether it's a U of I uptake curve or whoever, you can see that starts about V7, V8 and takes us through, VT. So I want to make sure that I've got a good amount on, and I want that plant to be happy going into that cycle, because if it's not, we're chasing our tail. It's going to be pretty challenging to catch up. And right now, there's not a lot of foliars I've seen on the market. There's a lot of claims that there is that can just be a Band-Aid for a gash wound.
Yeah. So we're moving. All right. Post plant. So do you do a lot of anhydrous ammonia pre-plant at United Prairie?
We do both. Fall's probably predominant, but we have some areas, as we get to some different geographies, as we've been fortunate to grow a lot, especially in the last 10, 12 years. We have some areas when you get south of 16, they're not going to do any fall ammonia. So we'll sit there, and there's a large amount of spring ammonia that goes on down there. So again, we're trying to allocate, shift equipment around, be efficient, but there is areas where we're still doing a lot of spring ammonia as well.
By the way, this is for the audience. If you have any questions as we're going through this, please enter them as we're going through, and we will attempt to answer those. So you see most of the anhydrous ammonia south of here, then south of Champaign, or south, and it works reasonably well where that done.
Well, I think we're always comparing year in and year out. I mean, I've had many years on our research farm right east of Sedoris where I've done some, fall ammonia versus spring ammonia, and the predecessor to me, Jeff Brown, did a lot. Always thinking, okay, we had a really wet year, we probably lost a lot. How's that equate out to final yields? And didn't see a lot of difference. So, but again, we're fortunate because we're sitting on high CEC, good organic matter soils. So is it a matter of the nitrogen's binding in the soil profile, or we're mineralizing, or is it a combination of both? And inevitably, it's probably a combination of both. But as you get down, Shelbyville South, where that drops off, and I mean, the soils are as wide as this piece of paper. They can't be doing that. It's not in their best interest. Contrary to what some may say, we are doing it. We try to avoid that as much as possible. And I can't say that everybody does that, but we try to be good stewards if we can. Yeah, ultimately, it's the grower's decision in the end. It's their farm, and we're working for them and working with them, not just for them.
So Joe, it's now spring. You planted the corn. Time to go, right? Or how you're going to put? How do you decide your rates and application method in spring?
So post crop, I mean, the rates, we usually have a target, of total in that we want, whether that's a flat rate or we've started doing some VRT applications with that side dress, to where it'll vary going through the field. It can vary, 20 or 30 pounds either direction based off of some different factors. Our first year doing that, and hard to get a good gauge with as dry as we were this year on doing that. But and then timing and products, I mean, usually try to be in that V3, V4, either right there before or right after we make a herbicide application, is when we're gonna turn the side dress bars loose. And there's still some farms that just logistically are hard to side dress. So that might be a 100% UAN scenario where we try to stabilize it and do the best we can. And just because something works in the flat black dirt of Champaign County doesn't mean that as you get into some different geographical issues, soil type issues, that these things that work for us at Klein Farms are going to work for other parts of the state or other parts of the country. And I think guys have to be willing to try different things, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, you say, hey, what we're doing is working, which is ideally what you want to happen. If you try something new and what you're doing currently is the better path, then that's a success as many times as if you learn that what you're doing is wrong. So, but yeah, from our timing, we're that V3, V4, V5. But like Kyle said, at some point, you just gotta, having that out there is the important part. We can't control a lot of the factors with Mother Nature and pick and choose the dates that we want to do it, or the timing. So when you get a window, you got to run. So whether that's UAN pre, spring ammonia, side dressing, whatever, I think it's important that that when we get the window, we're positioned to capitalize on that and get the stuff done in a timely fashion.
So I got a question for you, Joe. All right, this is a basic one. Could you describe the basic issues in plain language about the timing of nitrogen applications? So if you had to describe it in basic terms, how would you describe it?
Well, plan. And your ideal plan is not always what's going to happen. I mean, your ideal plan for us would be to have as many different applications as you could have. I mean, if you could spread that out into 3 or 4, great. Reality is you're going to probably do it in 1 or 2. So pick whatever times work for you, work on your farms, your soils, and I guess be positioned with people, products, and equipment to get it done as quick and as efficiently as you can, and hopefully in the best conditions that you can pick or Mother Nature is going to give you. Are there going to be times where you're doing it when you probably shouldn't be? We're all guilty of that, but that's definitely not the plan. But having that plan in place and be able to respond and act quickly on making those applications is important, I think.
Yep. To add to that a little bit, there's basically 4 times when you could put on nitrogen in East Central Illinois or Illinois. One is in the fall, coming up right here after harvest. The second time is in the spring before planting. Some people, and I don't know, Kyle, Joe, do you put on any with the planter?
I've got a number of growers that I've worked with over the years. I know we do as a company that, yes, I think that's starting to be looked at. So, I think it's interesting, back in the day when my grandpa was still living, they put a lot of starter on with the planter and then didn't see any benefit of it. And then you have my father's 68 years old now. He has no desire to mess with it. I think his generation, next generation, Joe and I's age, moves into it. I think you're seeing more and more discussion about it. And implemented in some essence, whether that be from a 2x2 or even looking at it just from an in-furrow aspect. And I mean, I know, Gary, you're going through the timings of being able to apply it, but now there's a number of companies out there that are looking at, biological ways of harnessing nitrogen into the plant, basically treating a corn plant very similar to what a bean plant does and fixating atmospheric nitrogen. That's something that I've extensively looked at for the last 3 years, just trying to evaluate and look at nitrogen, make it a limiting factor. What's the benefit of these products? If I'm putting on 200 pounds of synthetic in, what's it look like at 160 pounds of synthetic plus whatever product you want to throw in there? Because there's 3 or 4 different companies. Will that be a game changer in this industry? I think it could be in some essence. Is it going to work everywhere and every year? No, there's a lot of information that needs to be understood when you're messing with live biology.
Joe, do you use any biologicals?
We've done some testing with them, and I would say to date we haven't seen the magical product. Do I think that companies are investing a lot of money into that space? Absolutely. So I think I think it's something we hopefully will see in the future. The more tools we have in that toolbox or bullets in the gun we can fire, better off we all are. And I agree with the starter aspect. I think it's becoming more and more popular again. The biggest factors there are the cost of the initial equipment and the cost of those micros or the 1034 or whatever your equipment furrow can come at a pretty healthy price point that at $4 corn probably didn't make as much sense as it might at $6 or $7 corn. So things are always changing. There's never a shortage of places to spend money, and you just kind of got to prioritize what you're going to do and how many things you're going to do it. And as we all know, farmers aren't exactly patient by nature, and sometimes when it's time to plant corn, we want to go out there and plant corn as quickly and as efficiently as we can. And I know for us that when you start throwing starter on the planter and stuff like that, it does slow you down, and not everybody's wired that way. And I think we might have some people in our operation that would fit that mold. So yeah, there again, if we all did the same thing, it'd be pretty boring. And but always be ready and willing to learn, and hopefully our kids, the next generation that hopefully farmers with me can sit on a webinar in 30 years and say, well, my dad used to do it this way, and that's the thing of the past, and I can't believe he did it like that. It was crazy. And I think things have changed immensely in the 20 years I've been back, and we're going to see things change every day. And like I said, the things we're doing today, I bet I'd be willing to bet we're not doing in 10 years. So
No, that's
interesting times, but
go ahead, Joe, I'm sorry.
no, I'm done. I said just interesting times ahead of us.
Okay, yeah. No, and Jim here has reminded me that I didn't finish my 4 list. So I'll go back to my four list of time to apply nitrogen. One is fall, pre-plant, spring, planter, and then post-plant. And Kyle and Joe do post-plant applications with either, and that typically happens as anhydrous ammonia or nitrogen solutions, or UAN, 28% and 32%. And Joe, you do both, I believe, right?
Yeah, we split it up. Part of it is with corn on corn or different things. We like the anhydrous, so getting it down in the soil profile a little deeper than we can with a filter. And as you get, even we have a couple pivots. We've done some foliar through water or fertigation. So I'm sure there's some people maybe on this webinar that are utilizing that technology or those capabilities as well, especially when you get in those lower CEC farms, with some sand and stuff as you get closer to the river. So, both different forms, different application methods, benefits there are, let's try to get on as many acres as we can and get that done in that window that we're given. And, we have a close relationship with our retailer that does some custom work for us, and have some resources of our own to try to get it done as quickly and efficiently as possible when we identify those windows to get it done.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but putting anhydrous ammonia after planting is the minority of acres are probably put on that way. Am I correct there, Kyle? Or
just a smaller quantity of acres done that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, when I look at our footprint, before we moved, when we were just a 4-location facility right here, Ivesdale, Whiteheath, Tolono, and down south of Beeman at Pearson, it was all a lot of UAN side dress. And then as we opened up some other locations and got up to that 136 corridor, I noticed there's a heavier amount of ammonia application there. So I think it's part of it is this is what we've done for years, so I'm going to stick with that. The other thing that you're seeing a little bit more of, and I don't know whether this will take off more or not. I know some of the competitors that, the individual we compete against do more of this is also urea side dress. As a company, we've really, you allocate your investments into certain things, and it's been ammonia and 32 for us. For the last number of years, last year we started getting some equipment that has the ability to do some urea side dress, just to look at it. But I think that's a third mechanism to get it out there. And it works for some, not for everybody. As we all know, urea is one of the most volatile forms of nitrogen that's out there, if not the most volatile form. So every granular urea that comes out of our facilities has a nitrification inhibitor on it. That's just, we don't offer the straight product. Don't feel like that's in anybody's best interest.
So, Joe, I'm going to ask you an unfair question. If you had to choose one or the other, fall or post plant, which would you choose? Anhydrous ammonia or UAN?
If I could just wave my wand and get it done, I'm probably still partial to the ammonia. I think it can. I think the advantages outweigh the negatives for that form. It's going to convert to nitrogen probably at a slower rate, and hopefully be there as the plant needs it later on in its life cycle. So, that's an advantage there. And getting it in the soil profile, seeing that it's down there 6 or 7 inches is a peace of mind for us. But so I guess giving my choice, and I can get it all done in a day, ammonia, but there's a lot of other factors that have changed our approach on it.
Yeah, so the slowness of anhydrous ammonia is the big negative to it. I would take it then.
Yeah, I mean, a 40-foot toolbar is what we use, and you're 5.5, 6 mile an hour, and you get it with a culture at 60 foot, and you're running 9 or 10 mile an hour, and you got a big tank, and you can go, and it's probably I would say anhydrous ammonia is, you're probably getting 2 to 2.5 times more done in a day with the same size tractor and the same person. So it's just economics there of getting it done, and utilizing your equipment and labor is definitely a consideration that we take into it.
So all right. So are you, Joe, I'm gonna ask both of you this. Are you concerned about supply of nitrogen in this spring?
I think it's a consideration. I mean, do I hope we don't have to worry about it? Absolutely. I mean, I hope that's not a concern. I think it goes back to having the conversations with whoever you're dealing with, and whether you have on-farm storage or relying on commercial storage of, is it going to be available? And then the what ifs if it's not. So I wouldn't say it's at the top of my list of concerns, but it's definitely something that is a concern. And like I said earlier, I mean, things that we're facing today weren't on our radar 6 months ago, 2 years ago. So it's something we all need to recognize, but I guess it's not at the top of my list.
No, Kyle, what would you?
Oh, I mean, it's unfortunately anymore. This is always at the top of our list of what is that supply issue. I think if anything, the last couple of years, as I mentioned earlier, we've learned a lot, and our general manager Kurt Miller has done a phenomenal job. He does a lot of the buying for us. We've also hired a procurement guy between us and another joint venture that we do, where that's all he's doing all day is watching those markets, making sure we're getting it at a good price point as a company, at that same price point that we can pass along. And so it's a good price point for the grower, but then always looking at, number one, what our allocations are. Number two, what our inventory status is. So, I mean, those numbers are probably ran on a daily basis, and then understanding where the markets, do we need to put, how much 32% do we need of at Dewey versus what we need at Cowden versus over at Crispin? So that's where I go back to that communication factor. Supply is always going to be a concern, but that can help immensely if we just know what we need and we're not chasing our tail on an in-season application. Because Joe mentioned this earlier. I mean, we're fortunate in the past we're able to get by and do some of those things. It's just not the case anymore. But again, inventory and having that possession is everything. And having a big tank size to handle that is probably going to be a necessity from here on out. I don't care whether it's solution, whether it's ammonia, or whether it's chemical. We've got a number of warehouse sheds that are heated storage available to us, and they're packed full with chemical right now because of the issues we dealt with from that aspect the last 2 years. A lot of learning curves.
So I guess the Mississippi River isn't helping that situation now.
No, I think when you can at times go with a barge that's 100% full going down it, then we went to 70 and then 60. And I think last I heard we're filling barges 50% full to make it down there. And I mean, Gary knows as well as I do, and Joe does, that this isn't something that's just going to be resolved overnight. I mean, we better hope that there's one heck of a snowpack in northern areas this year that can melt off and fill this thing back up, because 3/4 tenths, an inch and a half of rain on every 2 or 3 weeks is not going to do it. Not going to do a city justice to get this issue fixed.
Yeah. So the other thing that's a big issue is price, I guess. So I mean, price projections or price thoughts here. Joe.
As far as how do you manage your price, or I guess.
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, yeah. What are you thinking about prices now and managing it? And do you have any expectation for the spring prices?
I think when you watch that urea market, I mean, if you look at that thing on a global market, I mean, it's so volatile, and and it kind of piggybacks on the conversation we just had of availability. I mean, sometimes you might be able to pick one or two of those things, but trying to time both of those right is probably a bigger struggle than it used to be. I was probably bearish fertilizer and nitrogen prices as things were trending down, into the summer. And then as we saw the urea market take off with the war in Russia, and I mean, so many different external factors that we can't control that, unfortunately we're held captive to the decisions by a few companies, and they decide they are going to limit product to a certain region or production or whatever, that our choices to hedge against that are pretty limited today. If we want to guarantee, supply, whether it's in the fall or the spring or whatever, I mean, the only way you're going to guarantee that is hopefully either have physical possession or to have, ownership on paper, and that usually means making a payment for it. So not a real good mechanism in place today to hedge that or to speculate. So I mean, we just got to figure out a way to make it work. And whether you're making that decision all at once or spreading that out over a couple different buying opportunities, kind of just depends on the guy's tolerance for risk and whether that's on the supply or the price side. So,
Kyle, any thoughts or?
Yeah, I mean, so I think looking at where we are today, I mean, always the big deciding factor that we talk about in this business, from where spring is going to go versus, where it is today, is it's always how much ammonia do we get on in the fall? Where does that drive that? Do we have a good season? And all of a sudden, now guys are probably not going to buy as much ammonia in the spring, so those suppliers keep that price at bay, or it's a tough season, or the guys are going to want it, so we're inversing. I mean, it's always fighting back and forth, and unfortunately, there's only 2 or 3 major suppliers that dictate what's going on here. I guess, talking internally, I see a lot of things just holding steady right now, even as we get into prepay season, which will be, the month of December right through January from where we are today. We're not seeing a lot of shifts, but we're also not getting carried away and loaded up on inventory because, are a little bearish in the market of what it could be, but there's always unknowns. I mean, the biggest thing that I know that's going on right now is, I mean, there's times where there's a barge of 32% that's heading overseas, passing a barge of 32 that's got to come back. I mean, they're maybe passing each other. Anything that we export out when it comes to net nitrogen on a lot of our products, it's got to come back because we're a user of it. So that's kind of got a little bit of concern right now on how that's going to work and who's going to be more attractive for purchasing in the end. But as Gary, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of it is, our hedging mechanism right now is still marketing some grain based off what we can purchase. And I think there's a lot of importance to that. I know that's tough for some to do that and pull the trigger, but 650 plus corn, I'm running my own budget and sheets, makes money right now. So the whole other side of this is also communicating this information with, landowners and those that maybe aren't is privy to seeing this on a daily basis. We've watched input prices. I mean, nitrogen's dang near tripled in the last 3 or 4 years. And I know when I look at my cash rents on some stuff, they have not adjusted the opposite direction as the input prices have. So I think it's always good to make to at least have conversation about this, make everybody aware of what we're dealing with overall as growers and as industry people.
Yeah, just to provide a little number here. The last number I've seen for anhydrous ammonia was $1,400 roughly. If you purchased it now, that's up from $1,100 earlier this spring, or not spring, fall. And a couple of years ago, that would have been 500 to 600. So there's where we're at. Looking a little bit forward, I could build a case for nitrogen prices going up and coming down. My biggest case going up is we have shortage of natural gas, the major input in Europe, and that's probably not going to end. And who knows what's going to happen in Ukraine and Russia. But natural gas prices here are coming down. So there you go. Use those two to build your case.
But I think that you're going to see a lot of growers, Gary, that are going to explore all these other avenues, again, from that biological aspect, from a management of nitrogen a little bit better. I mean, I think there's positives in this, if a guy who's predominantly maybe been over applying nitrogen, or maybe I feel like they're over applying, they feel like they're right on target. Well, you know what? I'm going to throttle back down a little bit because of the price of N, and hey, you know what, come to find out my yields didn't change that much. So maybe there's some positives out of that. There's obviously a point where it now becomes the limiting factor, and we can't throttle back too much. But I think I encourage growers to continue to monitor what's happening with these new products in the industry, whether it's through, you know, research that we're doing, GrowMark, Nutrient. I don't care what company. There's a lot of research going on out there, and localized information, I think, could help guide a guy down a path.
We have a question here. Are nitrogen stabilizers compatible with herbicides? I'm assuming this is a spring applied situation.
Yeah. So I mean, the answer to the question is the ones that I'm working with today, they are. When I usually think of herbicides and when antagonism comes into play is when you're bringing in a triazine or an atrazine component and bringing ammonium thiosulfate in. And I would say in the last 5-6 years, our usage of that product has, it's skyrocketed because we're seeing the lack of sulfur in these plants and getting it out of the atmosphere. So when you bring another player into that arena, so if I've got a UAN and I've got ATS and I've got a herbicide, now we're going to bring in maybe a nitrification inhibitor into it. Just because it says it'll mix, I still encourage jar testing or following with that. Again, what's triggering that the most is a high salt content of ammonium thiosulfate and an atrazine or some clay-based mix, or it could be other mechanisms in there. But kind of a long-winded answer to the question, but it's yes and no.
So Joe, has the high prices of nitrogen impacted your crop decisions, whether to plant more corn or soybeans, or that come in at all, or what are you thinking for next year, given the prices and things?
I think we're going to stick with our rotation. I mean, we're still pretty heavily just a 50-50 corn soybean rotation. Some of our irrigated seed corn ground will go continuous corn. And that's a crop that's not using as much nitrogen, but it all comes down to the prices and the bushels you think you can generate. And, agronomically, we still want to make those decisions, but majority of the time, what we're deciding to do is all financially driven, and whatever we're going to get the highest return for is probably the direction we're going to go. So, when we were looking at even high priced solution this summer, when you were looking at that time $6.50 or $7 corn, even with 90 cents a pound nitrogen, we did plant some more corn acres this summer. I guess back in April and May, the market was telling guys to plant corn, and I guess we did that on a couple of farms. But I think the days of the wide swings in acreage, it seems like in the I states, isn't what it was back when the corn on corn craze was going crazy in the 2005 to 2012. As we've seen bean yields ratchet up from 60 to 70, and now we're looking at 80 and 90 bushel beans. Beans have became a pretty good player in the marketplace from a return on that acre and making some real money with soybeans. So it's the cost of nitrogen, but yet also the advancements we've made with raising soybeans and making that. It used to be a rotational crop, and now it's a very profitable crop to raise. So, just a lot of factors that there again, be fluid and react to some changes if you can, and do what you can to spread your risk.
Yeah, risk management is key right now. So, Kyle, we have one question. Kyle, do you have a feel for how much of the nitrogen applied is done by the grower or someone else, or the United Prairie? Or
Gosh, to come up with something off the top of my head, I don't. When it comes to ammonia side of things, our custom ammonia business has grown quite a bit. I think going to continue to obviously drive that is just the lack of personnel on the farm, which is not just a farm situation. I mean, it's for us just as well. So again, it's if somebody says, you know what, I mean, we're getting calls every day. Hey, I'm still working on harvest. If ammonia season hits and you can put my ammonia on, go ahead. You know, you want to be happy with that phone call, but at the same time, you just fret and worry about it because there's not enough butts in the seats to begin with in some places. So do we do a fair amount in fall? Yeah. As we move into spring, I would say, I know I was doing some research a few years ago, just looking at the amount of growers in the state of Illinois that have their own sprayers versus other states around us. Illinois is actually one of the lowest. There's more retail driven applications, it seemed like, in Illinois than what I would say in, Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, and things like that. So that tells me we're still doing a fair amount. Now, when it comes to side dress season, there is still a lot of growers that do their own side dressing. I encourage don't ever count on us for a bar. I encourage individuals to have their own tool bar. That way they can be efficient in their applications. As we've said a number of times, we can never outguess what Mother Nature's going to do. And if you're sitting there waiting for a piece of equipment because grower A, B, and then C gets it, and then it comes to you, I'm an impatient person, so I can't be doing that. So I can't encourage growers to do that as well.
Joe, you put all your own on?
We have the equipment, and we try to get as much done as we can, but we still do work with our local retailers and rely on them to do some stuff for us. And there again, just have those conversations and relationships in place to have somebody to call when you need help. And we're just, people logistics, there's certain things that you can only do so much in a day or with the people you have. So I guess yes and no, we do as much as we can, but to say we do all of it would be an inaccurate statement. So.
Okay. So we're going to end today. So what are your concerns about nitrate runoff, or what are you doing or thinking about that? Joe, Kyle?
Joe, you want to go first? You want me to go first?
Well, I think we're all trying. I think every farmer I know wants to be a good steward of the land, and no one's out there doing things that they knowingly would do to hurt the environment or any parts of those things. Using stabilizers, getting into the soil profile, different timings. I think we've had all those different options at some point of our conversation here in the last hour that, there's a lot of different tools out there to do it. And at the end of the day, our end goal is to do things as profitable and efficiently as possible and environmentally friendly. So, like I said, the stabilizers and the different timings and just recognizing that we're trying to do the best we can with what we have.
Kyle?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly that the timings of things is one of the major steps that a lot of us can do and adapt to. Even myself, when it comes to the stabilizer side of things, for years, it was always, hey, the stabilizer is going to go in with the ammonia because it's going to be insert. That's going to make sense. When it comes to 32% application, what are you going to do? Well, I started making decisions like I have this many dollars in a bucket. Am I going to put ammonium thiosulfate with that 32% solution, or am I going to put a stabilizer with it? And I always erred to the side of ammonium thiosulfate because of the yield response I was seeing out of it. I've taken upon myself probably the last 2 years to just try to better understand stabilizers and what they're doing. And there's two reasons to look at. Some are fine with a biological activity being, I guess lack of better words, killed, so that they can't go through the whole nitrification process. Some rather would not that happen. So there's a lot of different products on the market that claim to do a number of different things to protect that nitrogen form and what it's doing to the bacteria. So looking at that just as much. And then again, as I said earlier, Gary, it's got to be about return on investment in the end. I know of the 188 trials that I had on the research farm this year, and I harvested them all myself. I will say that probably one of the most eye-opening ones was my nitrification inhibitor study, and looking at 5 different products and trying to make nitrogen limiting factor. I put 150 pounds of N on. Is that enough to grow a good crop? It is, but I wanted to see if I could make that stretch out a little bit longer. And I've, unfortunately got probably a month's worth of sitting in the office compiling data. But when you're sitting in the combine seat, staring at an iPad and yield monitor and then a weigh wagon, you start to kind of make your own assumptions of things, and I saw some benefits. So I look forward to sharing that and continuing that study and implementing some of those strategies here in our part of the world.
So Kyle, hopefully we'll have some more time to sit in the office very soon here.
I hope so. Well, I don't know that I hope so, but I do.
Well, I want to thank, we are coming to the end of our webinar today. I want to thank Kyle Meese and Joe Klein for being here with us. We're going to be entering that interesting nitrogen fertilizer decisions for 2023, and we hope you've enjoyed our webinar. Be sure to complete the webinar survey as you exit, and thank you for attending today.